Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really awesome guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for many people out there. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Angeli Möller, who is head of the Data and Integrations Generating Insights Group, or DIGI group at Roche, which is a really interesting part of the organization focused on bringing together data and technology from both Roche's Diagnostics business as well as their pharmaceutical division to ultimately enable innovation for patients. Previously, Dr. Möller served as head of Pharma Informatics International at Roche, focused specifically on driving the employment of different technologies like artificial intelligence to ultimately, as they say, get the right treatments to the right patients at the right time. Prior to Roche, Dr. Möller led the artificial intelligence workstream and was responsible for the research digital investment strategy at Bayer Pharmaceuticals. And before that, she worked as a data scientist for translational medicine at Thomson Reuters, as well as a researcher at Cancer Research UK and the Max Delbrück Center for Molecular Medicine. And Dr. Möller is a major proponent of this topic we'll be getting into called pre-competitive collaborations. She co-founded the Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare, where she's vice chair, and as well as a member of a really interesting company called Multiomic Health. She also serves as a member of the Science and Technology Facilities Council of UK Research and Innovation, supporting a wide swath of other areas of research, including astronomy, physics, space science, and operates various world-class research facilities in the UK and has some oversight there. Dr. Möller has her bachelor's in molecular biology from the University of Aberdeen, went on to do her Ph.D. in molecular biology with an oncology focus at the University of Edinburgh, and then did postdoc work in neuroproteomics of neurodegeneration at Max Delbrück Center for Molecular Medicine. A lot of really interesting themes to get into today. We're honored to have her with us, though. So, Dr. Angeli Möller, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you for having me, Ira. It's great to be here.
It's awesome having you. I'm really excited about sort of the spectrum that we're going to be getting into today. I would like to, though, as we typically do, start things off by handing things over to you for a little bit to talk a little bit more about you and some of the early background, because while we've been getting into sort of digital and silicon, you started off in the sort of the wet and wild world of biology. You did your PhD on really interesting area, something called intrabodies, which I had to read up on, and their role in tumor suppression. You went on to do this fascinating work in neurodegeneration in diseases like Huntington's and spinocerebellar ataxia. Talk a little bit about this, because I think this really sets the stage for everything else we're going to be getting into, but it is a really neat background story.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ira. But you're absolutely right. It's a rare occasion these days that I get the chance to go back into some of my early research. And I had to smile when you used the term intrabodies, because I can remember sitting with my principal investigator, Professor Catherine Ball, and we were coming up with that name. We were brainstorming different names for what do you call a single chain antibody that can traverse the cell membrane and then is active actually at the DNA layer, which is a very rare site for a single chain antibody to then have any kind of activity. So I just had a funny flashback to what do we call that now when we want to publish about it? So that was the first area of research where I was really active. Before that, I did some honors work in diabetes and how to induce insulin production. But the opportunity that I got at Cancer Research UK, which is where I was for 4 years, was to really work in an area of very high unmet need. So the interferon regulatory 1 pathway I was looking at plays a significant role in leukemia. And we were looking at what sort of new and revolutionary treatment options could we come up with. There was quite a lot of promise in single chain antibodies at the time, of course, trying to have an effective targeting and to have an effective transition of the active molecule to the target was a challenge across the industry and across academia at the time. And we were looking at how can we address that. And in that intrabody publication that you mentioned, we really looked at some results that showed a great deal of promise in being able to then activate tumor suppressor proteins. And so for those of you listening who don't work in the oncology field, if you can activate a tumor suppressor protein, it does exactly that. It then starts to suppress all of the pathways that lead to tumor formation. And that's what we were really going after.
Excellent. Really excellent. And as you were doing this work, obviously very active in oncology, active in neurodegeneration, you continue that work, innovative targets, innovative methodologies for impacting these targets. Another theme comes sort of across your responsibility area, and that is this evolving concept of real world data in drug development, in innovation in our industry. You were involved in a very interesting study back in 2018 that was in Drug Discovery Today. It was entitled The Positive Impacts of Real World Data on the Challenges Facing the Evolution of Biopharma. Not just talking about, hey, we have our typical clinical development models here, but there's all this other information out there that is real, and hence the real world of what happens ultimately when these products get beyond the clinical trials into the greater population. And in this paper, you not just talk about the importance of real world data, but you bring up a very important theme that becomes an important part of your story as well, the concept of pre-competitive collaborations, specifically in this case for real world data. And we'll be getting into it later on when we get into some of the artificial intelligence stuff. But the fact that, we need, although we're competing, Roche is competing with the Abbotts and the Novartises and GSKs and so forth of the world. When it comes to this big picture, we need to think about how we can all work together to take advantage of what it really gives us in terms of an understanding of disease in patients. Talk about this theme a bit, because I think it is extremely important, not just for what you're doing then, for what you're getting into.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I don't think all of my publications have ever been looked at in such detail before, so I wanted to smile at that as well. It began in my postdoctoral studies. So when I applied for a postdoc, I was lucky enough to get 2 EU Framework 7 grants. And so these are grants that you're awarded from the European Union because your research proposal is felt to be of sufficient value. And the 2 grants that I was part of, Eurospin and Synsis, weren't just for the research I was driving, but they actually covered 15 different labs spread across the European Union and Israel at the time. In fact, we were even fortunate enough to have part of the research group include Erwin Neher, who is the Nobel Prize winner for his patch clamp technique, and also some of the professors who were involved in the work of Thomas Südhoff, who also won the Nobel Prize for his work in MUNC18. So really the ability to work across country with absolutely fantastic scientific leadership. And so at the time, I thought, oh, that's totally normal. This is what happens. This is a normal way to work. I really didn't appreciate the significance at the time. And then I missed it when I left academia. I thought, this is odd. I'm just stuck in what felt a little bit isolated with my own thoughts and my own ideas about how to solve a complex problem. And so during my postdoctoral studies, one of the pieces of work we did was looking at how do I predict the location of a protein interaction, and that was the one thing that we published on. And to get there, we had to do a lot of work around data mining, what actually exists. And then we were using just some support vector machine learning models to then come up with predictions of likelihood. How likely is it that different proteins interact? But there was a massive amount of data mining. And data mining in do we see in the laboratory? What do we see in animal studies? What do we see in human studies? And what do we see out in the real world? And bringing that all together, and then using systems biology to really then model how likely we thought it was that these interactions were taking place, where they were taking place, what sort of state the human chemical synapse was in. So in different states, different interactions take place. So that's another layer of complexity.
Yep.
And trying to create a perfect model of a healthy human synapse so that then we would understand what it looked like in different disease states. Even though all of my funding has been for disease research, a lot of that funding in neuroscience was on what does actually a healthy neuron synapse look like? Does anybody really know? And I first had that first interaction with real world data, although that wasn't a huge part of my postdoctoral study. That was the first interaction. But as I said before, Ira, it was that beauty of being able to work internationally with multiple perspectives and to appreciate the benefit of connecting with great minds from other organizations around the world. And so as I moved on and I went to Thomson Reuters and worked there as a senior data scientist for translational medicine, I was working for clients. My clients were then Sanofi, were Pfizer, were Roche, were Bayer, were Merck in Darmstadt. And what I saw is a lot of challengers that could really benefit from the potential of real-world data. They started to become a common theme. And the studies at the time were very isolated. Actually, I say at the time, still are. You would have a study or a collection of data that had been developed for other purposes and then cleaned and harmonized for a specific project. I want to answer this scientific question. For instance, I want to know how likely it is that patients with this phenotype will have a stroke. And then you would do all of the data cleaning, all of the data collection for that purpose. You would run that analysis. You would then, I don't know, file away or store that data somewhere where not many other people could look at it. And you might have got one publication out of it to say, I think this is what the likelihood of stroke is based on these different variables. I think I was missing the additional benefit that could be obtained if that data set was made available for other purposes. So I'm not just answering this one question about stroke, but I want to ask about the entire journey for a cardiovascular patient, all the way through to different early metabolic diseases like diabetes, like obesity, through to things that might affect the heart. Also, of course, even distant indications like ophthalmology, which we know are also connected to these metabolic disorders. So how can I get full use out of this data beyond an individual project? And this is where in that paper that we wrote about the uses of real world data, we wanted to make a little bit of a stance really around sharing data, around sharing standards. And I guess the paper was really written for executives of different companies and healthcare systems, because we wanted to show with specific examples what was the business return of investment they could get out of having common standards, common data sharing agreements.
Yeah, no, it was very impressive, especially for, this new concept and again how you bring that pre-competitive theme in that we all as a farm industry, whatever, in this, and if we work together on, can't work together on everything, but at the end of the day, if there's some of these evolving domains that teach us so much more about patients and medicines and everything in between, that it benefits us all. So that's why I wanted to go there before we go into what you're doing now. So I appreciate that overview. Talk a little bit, if you would, about DIGI now, Data and Integrations Generating Insights Group. Prior, as I mentioned, you're leading up Pharma International Informatics. A couple of years ago, we had Fanny C join us from Roche Canada, talking a little bit about some of what they're doing up there in artificial intelligence. But your organization seems to take a sort of a much broader swath of this, bringing in both sort of the pharma, the diagnostics, and again, talking about, as you were just mentioning, sort of that continuum. It seems to me that everything from AI and drug discovery on through to, I saw something on the Roche website about, being this partner in the patient's journey, after these products are out there. Walk us through DIGI, what your responsibility, and ultimately how you got there. Say, hey, who called you up? Said, Angeli, we got a great position for you to integrate all these concepts at our organization. Take us through that story, if you would.
I am happy to, Ira. You're so right that these moves often begin with somebody calling you up. I think for anyone who takes a peek at my LinkedIn profile, each one of those steps have started with somebody calling me up out of the blue and saying, "Hey, what do you think about this?" So I think it's helpful to also take a step back to my time at Bayer. Mm-hmm. Because at least for me, it began when Bayer acquired Monsanto, which you might have seen in the news.
I remember that.
Monsanto had a very interesting informatics and digital capability. And I was on the pharma side, so I wasn't close to crop sciences. I can't pretend I was, but I had the opportunity to go out and spend time with the informatics group, which used to be headed by Jim Swanson, who's now at J&J, and to spend some time with Andy Montgomery's team. So Andy's since moved on to new roles, but he led something called Global Data Assets. And within there, they were looking at how do we take data from across different parts of Monsanto and make it available for new purposes to either generate new efficiencies or new revenue streams across the company. And it was really one of those light bulb moments. You could always imagine the light bulb going off above my head. And I thought, this is maybe in real life something that I'd been thinking in theory would make sense for a while. And what I'll give you some examples from Monsanto. For instance, they were looking at, if I collect all of this information about changes in climate and also about soil nutrition, then can I go back and offer farmers, and here I mean individuals who grow crops, not pharmaceutical companies, can I offer them not just a product, but could I also offer them information that will optimize the yield that they have per square meter? So then do they know for the climate that they have in real time, for the condition of the soil they have, for the types of other plant life and animal life in the area, what are the optimal activities they could do to have the most crop? And if I then translated that into the pharmaceutical space, we started to say, okay, what if I could go out to a physician and not just say, this is the pharmaceutical product, but really say, I know what the population is you're seeing. We know what sort of patients are coming through your clinic. We know what their trajectory looks like based on the data we have available. Of course, this is large scale data and this is anonymized data. And this is the best sort of treatment regime that you can start to offer in your clinic to be able to benefit the maximum number of patients you're seeing. To really recognize as well that a patient is a mixture of a medical history that can be very complex, that can only be partially recorded, of different concomitant medications, some of which we might have a lot of information about, some of which we might not have any information about how they appear together. So how can we provide a healthcare professional with that full spectrum of information that will lead to better outcomes, not for the average patient, but for the patients that are really walking into their clinic, whether they're in a rural area, whether they're in a tier 1 city in Shanghai, whether they're seeing people who have a very high fat diet, or whether they're seeing people who have a more lean lifestyle. And so this is then a concept that we brought over to Bayer Pharmaceuticals. And I ended up leading the Global Data Assets Group, so the exact mirror organization in the pharmaceutical division. And it wasn't a time where I thought, oh, I'm going to do a lot of fantastic organizational design. We just took exactly what they had in Monsanto and replicated it on the pharma side, covering the entire pharmaceutical division and radiology. And so I led that global data assets team. And as I said, the goal was then to have data from across the whole company accessible to the rest of the company. And then, of course, one day I got a call from Roche. And Roche said, we'd be interested in having you come across and look at what we're doing at Roche. And even in that early interview, Alan Hipper, who is our chief financial officer at Roche and the head of my line organization, Alan was already at the time talking about what would be the value of looking at data holistically across the company. So you could see he had that vision that came across very clearly during that first discussion that I had with him. And so I moved to Roche, and I would say that one of the triggers always is how much data do you have access to? This is always for me a trigger, and Roche is a very data savvy organization, but it's also a very data rich organization that has a long history of working on what does it mean for data to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable across the company? So they've made a lot of investments in that area, as well as having generated or acquired a lot of very interesting data over time. And I began in the commercial area, so in commercial informatics out in the affiliate. But then last year in July, we had the opportunity to kick off this entirely new organization, DIGI. So and as you managed to remember, that is data and integrations generating insights. And so here I had the background at Bayer of having led the global data assets division. I'd spent, of course, the time looking at different industries and different companies at what was working in terms of making data accessible for the whole company. But I'd also started to become aware of some work that was already going on at Roche in the implementation of a new concept called data mesh.
Okay.
And so here, what we'd done in the past was we'd said, let's centralize the cleaning of the data. Let's centralize the ability to provision the data. And then let's even allocate funds, so really allocate money to use cases that we think are going to have the highest impact on a new revenue stream or on an efficiency gain, like reducing the cost of goods. What we saw actually with the data mesh concept was something where, my colleagues at Roche will tell you that they had to pitch it to me for like 3 months before I was fully on board with it, although now I'm one of the biggest champions. And there it was, why don't we have a more democratized and decentralized approach? And so at its core, it means that the DIGI team provide self-service platforms to the group. And those self-service platforms make sure that data can be accessed across all parts of the group, and that you can run the analytics you would need to on top. And we can talk a little bit more about what we do in the analytics offering,
Mm.
but that different parts of the whole group could then come up with their own use cases, the own ways they wanted to derive value. And they would also be responsible for maintaining the quality of the data that they were producing. And they would also be responsible for making sure it matched certain technical standards to be accessed by the rest of the company. So I'll maybe make that a little bit more tangible.
Sure.
Instead of saying a central team is going to take research data, make sure that it's accessible for somebody who's working in manufacturing formulations, so they can have the right formulation for that molecule. Instead, we're going to say the research team just has to make sure that all of their data can be accessed by the rest of the company. The rest of the company need to find it. And then that person in formulations can just look it up in something called the Roche Data Marketplace and start to use it to improve the quality of their work. And you don't need a big central team coordinating that and saying, hey, you should do this, and why don't you do that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the tools behind, accessing and crunching all of this data, whether it's someone in the pharma side saying I need such and such artificial intelligence tool to analyze this set of patients, the diagnostic people saying I'm thinking about this companion diagnostic that's going to work in such way. Talk a little bit about how you sort of cultivate innovation collaborations in this process. Clearly, obviously you're really good at understanding both, as I said, the biology and the silicon. A lot of companies, startups, whatever out there right now pitching the newest, greatest, whether it's machine learning or whether it's whatever the next generation tool is. Talk a little bit of that process, because I'm sure you got not just you don't have to keep up to speed with what's happening in the clinic and what's happening in drug development and diagnostic business, but you got to keep you have to keep up to date with everything else that's happening out in the non-pharma world as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, I mean, really happy to. So you're right that a big part of our work is making technical decisions. So this is a huge part of our work. At the same time, it starts off with a business decision. So it starts off with having a clear understanding of what is differentiating for Roche. Yeah. Because there is a point that every informatics professional knows where you have to say, is this something that I want to build or buy? Yep. Or now, I think increasingly it is buy and adapt. But where am I on this spectrum? Because as much as I might find a workplace that is powered by machine learning and large language models fascinating, can I use a large language model to write a better email? Can I use a large language model to write a better document for regulatory submission? Yep. Could I use a large language model to write documents that I might need in manufacturing? There's a point here as well where you also say, do I want my vendor to do that? Do I want my IT software vendor who already helps with the process of writing emails? So we all know what sort of software we use to write emails, so I won't mention any vendor names. But do I want to go and build that, or do I just want them to put that capability into the solutions we already have for these day-to-day processes? And do I just want them to recognize that now machine learning, large language models have changed what is possible, and they should be changing the offering that they're bringing to us? So that's one part of the discussion. What is a differentiating use of technology for Roche? What is something that is not differentiating, is still needed, but I just expect our vendors to put that on the table in the solutions that they're bringing to us. And then we go into areas where you say, okay, this is really differentiating. And I'll give you an example there. Is we've you might see if you follow my likes on LinkedIn that a member of the Roche team recently ran a patent for their work on synthetic data generation. Okay. And so synthetic data generation, I mean, we definitely try to push this concept also pre-competitively, because that can make a big difference for regulators and how willing regulators are to accept models which have been developed on synthetic data, and what sort of constraints there might be when your prediction is based on synthetic data. But this is something that was not moving fast enough, I would say, or is not moving fast enough in the industry. And if you look at certain rare diseases, you're just never going to have enough data if you're going around and looking at data generated from individual patients. And so if you look at the self-driving car industry, then there we saw a lot of very good proof on the value of models developed on synthetic data generation. So you might know they took images and they made, like, is it a muddy lamppost? Is it a lamppost in fog? Is it a lamppost in a storm? And then they trained their models on recognizing a lamppost in different conditions. That was some of the sort of first work of applying synthetic data in a large scale in a real world situation, and then showing it work in practice. And we were not seeing that happen fast enough in healthcare. So Roche has really invested in synthetic data, what synthetic data can actually do, not to replace real human studies, which I think play a really critical regulatory process, but what can it do to add some more information as we're doing exploratory analysis. And so that then you go back to your original question, Ira, how do you start to make a tooling choice? My experience has been that this is less of a tooling choice and it's more of a talent choice. So first of all is, do you have the right people? And when you have those people, are you providing them with the continuous learning opportunities? So you can't expect the work that you're doing this year in informatics to be good enough for the work you need to do next year in informatics. The nature of informatics isn't like that. And so are we looking and providing, are we looking for talents that are passionate about staying up to date with the latest methodologies and techniques? And are we also providing them with an environment that allows them to stay up to date? And then if I go a little bit further, we have a fantastic thing called Inner Source at Roche, across the Roche group. And Inner Source is a little bit like GitHub, I guess. It's based on GitLab.
Okay.
What it has around it, in addition, is the legal framework to allow our developers to work on open source initiatives, and also a legal framework in case we want to take things open source. So the tooling is well known, but then we have a little bit of a framework and what we call the developer experience built around that. And here, if you go back to then some of these challenges where we say, look, this isn't a buy or adapt problem, this is a build problem, then it really comes down to how you're providing the right developer experience so that your teams can go in and work on these problems, but, and then back to the first part of our conversation, can collaborate with each other easily to exchange code, to make recommendations about different libraries or solutions they should be looking at, so that they can build the most robust solution for the problem that might be in front of them. I think much like academic science, software development is one of the most collaborative environments in the world, and I think that that's something that we're keen to preserve within the company, because it's not as if you have everybody who is capable of fantastic model development or software development sitting in one reporting line. They're across the whole company, and that's why it's very important we have this inner source framework to allow them to have code development, code sharing, and also to contribute externally when that makes sense to open source initiatives.
Very cool. Very cool. Angeli, as you're talking about sort of how you run the organization, and again, thinking that, here we have Roche, one of the largest pharma companies in the world, technically the largest biotech company in the world. You have to build this really unique digital architecture around and through it, 100-plus-year-old company. But in addition to all that, you also get the opportunity to, not just do that, but also serve and sit on the board of other startups that are doing similar stuff. And one of these, which I found completely fascinating, again, is something that you can and be involved in building from the ground up using these same concepts, is your role on Multiomic Health, which I don't know if you had a chance to see. We just happened to do this episode a couple of weeks ago with Lee Hood, sort of the grandfather of systems biology, talking about these concepts. Here, the company is involved in specifically metabolic health, again, bringing together the genomics, the epigenomics, the transcriptomics, all the omics stuff, plus the microbiome in an architecture that for this, as the company points out, sort of this $1 trillion problem that we don't have a lot of answers for, that the combination of life sciences and digital sciences merging together can build something really cool. Talk a little bit about your time as sort of a board member slash, I guess, venture capital consultant on a startup initiative like this. Really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, Robert Thong, who's the CEO, and we just had a check-in call this morning as well. And I mentioned to him I was doing this podcast, and so he might find it interesting to listen to why I'm so passionate about the work we do together. So I think it really goes back to that early time when I worked in proteomics. Okay. And what's so obvious there is that if you only look at RNA, if you only look at proteins, if you only look at the spliceosome, if you only look at DNA, if you only look at post-translational modification or epigenetics, you only see a tiny, tiny bit of the complexity of a human being. And when I have the opportunity to daydream, it's often daydreaming about what it would look like if we really model all of those areas where we're starting to understand more about what's happening inside a human cell, and then take that modeling to the macro level to say what is happening between a cluster of cells, between a cluster of organisms, within inside a whole human being. I think if there are any data scientists listening to this podcast, I would love to highlight to them how far away we are from being able to accurately model a whole human being, or even a whole heart or lung at that level of detail. I spent 4 years trying to model a human chemical synapse as an example. And so the approach that Robert and his team pitched to me when they asked me if I'd like to join the scientific advisory board was, we would like to really push the boundaries of what we can do with systems biology. And we would like to do it in this area of high unmet need, so metabolic disorders. And particularly, I think one of the pieces we were interested in is this is an area of high unmet need, also in many developing areas around the world. And so how do we make sure that we're working on models which are accurate for a diverse population? So that's very core to a lot of what we do at Multiomic Health. We certainly have a large set of our cohorts coming from Europe, and the company is based in the United Kingdom, but we make sure that we're building up data sets that are really accurate for world health. And what does it look like to be able to serve global populations? And here, I think, you mentioned on the venture bit, that's also obviously a very exciting journey. So we just finished our pre-seed funding round successfully. But what I also like very much about Robert's approach is he is not trying to run around and just raise money. I think we saw a lot of companies doing this without a very substantial core. Yeah. And the approach that Robert's taking with Multiomic Health is, let's build a substantial core. So let's make sure that we're focused on having high quality data sets, high quality predictive models. And that means a few very good scientists. That means access to high quality samples with a large number of omics assays run on each sample. But let's not rush out and start to raise funds for something that isn't a solid core. So I think in the flurry of fundraising that we've seen over the past few years, I also appreciated his approach to the finances of the company as much as the scientific approach of the company.
Absolutely. Extremely important. With that being said, as you're just pointing out sort of the issue about some of these technologies that they're coming. They might not be here in the next couple of years, but whether it's digital twins or in silico clinical trials or quantum, we've done some quantum biology episodes, and they're coming. If I could give you $1 trillion today and send you out there and to sort of ramp up the development of some of these next generation tools on sort of the digital tech, the tech bio front, what gets you excited? What is it? Digital twins? Is it remote diagnostics? Like, what are the things that you look at your wish list of potential here of where this all could go? Because clearly it could go some really interesting directions if we all have enough money. Take us into some of your passion, your vision there for the decade and beyond.
Thank you, Ira. And I'm going to answer that question honestly, despite the fact that my boss will be listening. But I don't think it's about money. So I right now I wouldn't even ask my team or Roche to give me more funding. I think it is not about going and acquiring new platforms. Of course, I fully respect my peers who are developing different platforms to bring and sell to pharmaceutical companies. But I think it is much more about having talent who can select the right model, have the right compute power. So spending money on compute power sensibly is a huge topic. But I don't think it is a platform that allows them to patch them together with good workflows. I think there you've got to think a little bit about cost efficiency and what is a nice developer experience at the right price is what I would look at there. That's not where I'd be spending my trillions. I think
give some of it back then.
Yeah, I think definitely. But I think where it is needed is in education, because as I said, I do think it's really about the talent that you have and having the talents of the next generation know what is possible and how they can start to tackle all the problems that we face around the globe with the smart use of the technology that's today available. I would certainly push it into looking at the compute power. I think what we're seeing from chip manufacturers is really what's driving the AI revolution. It's not even really been the new model development. It's really been what we've seen from the chip manufacturers that's made everything in the last few years possible. I would say that one of the things that you mentioned that intrigued me was it'll come in a few years, but actually there are things in clinical development today that were largely developed in silico. So as we look at things entering the clinic today, that's true. I know that we don't see them out on the market yet, but they are good enough and they are robust enough now to have gone into the clinic. I think on digital twin, I was recently at the UKRI Center, which is part of the Science and Technology Facilities Council, and we were looking at simulations of how do you design a car for the best wind flow across the car. So, and you had a digital twin of a whole wind tunnel that they test aerodynamics in. And I think that the digital twin model is already there. It's already used in all smart manufacturing. I think if you're in manufacturing and you're not exploring that area, then that's maybe a thing to ask yourself about and to be worried about. And the same with in silico drug discovery. I think there's been so many bounds there that if that's not a big part of how you're working, then it's a little bit now of a miss the boat situation instead of it hasn't yet reached day-to-day practice. So I feel like there's a lot of progress made. I do feel like the next level of progress is going to be on having more compute power, but at a scalable cost, trying to work out intelligent ways to have data storage and data processing that don't dramatically increase our carbon footprint as well as our cost. I think people need to not forget that your CO2 emissions are connected to your computational needs and your data storage needs. And then really very much on having a larger talent pool that are able to work together in a collaborative environment. I think in the way that was originally imagined when the World Wide Web was first created at the CERN Institute, to allow scientists, and in this case now developers, to work collaboratively, to publish their results, to fork each other's code, to be able to constantly iterate and improve on what each other are doing. And the more people we bring into that environment of an even higher quality, I think the more we can do.
Angeli, a couple of years ago, you served on a panel. This was at the Global Coalition on the Aging Conference. I think this was 2018, 2020. And the title of the panel was Information and Communication Technology and Older People, Health Systems Change for Healthy Aging, the Role of Remote Care and Artificial Intelligence. And I just want to ask you to say a couple words about the whole age of aging, because this has been a kind of hot topic for us, not just in sort of the aging in place, aging at home, age tech community, but also sort of the longevity biosciences has sort of ramped up in the last couple of years, at which, it's not just this theme of, can we target the diseases of aging, which is obviously everything that Roche has in its portfolio, but can we work upstream, potentially work on aging itself before we get sick? Just love to have your sort of thoughts on, as a at this interesting intersection of tech and bio again. Any interesting topics regarding aging, projects, anything you could talk about related to health span, and some of these new themes that we're beginning to hear a lot about per this particular discipline?
I mean, I can refer back to that panel in which I was really talking about healthy aging. So how do we not necessarily tackle the fact that human life has an end date, as all life does, but to really tackle what does it mean to have a healthy experience, to have an experience where you're able to enjoy your family, enjoy your loved ones, enjoy your passions for as long as possible. And of course, part of that is tied up, for instance, in neurodegeneration, which was the field that I studied during my postdoctoral years. I think that it is, for me, that is the important part. So, I mean, come back and ask me again in 50 years how I feel. But today, I would say that it's very interesting to look at what is happening, for instance, particularly in the fields of neuroscience and neurodegeneration, on what does it mean to have a healthy aging experience. And during that panel, I remember that I talked a lot about cardiovascular care, and I think osteoporosis as well.
Yep.
I think that there is, in the digital side, one of the things that for several years I've been following, and this is completely outside of any of the organizations I belong to, so this is not in my role at Roche or my role at the STFC or my role at Multiomic Health, this is outside of that, but the work that's been done to support patients with osteoporosis. And in the UK, you might know that it's long been an area of concern. What is your waiting time until you can actually have an operation? And then what is the capacity of the National Health Service in the UK to follow you up in your treatment regime and to have proper physiotherapy care? And then, one of the reasons I'm particularly interested in this is it's very, very common in my own family. And so here, I think it is then somewhere where there's a lot of progress in apps and devices that allow you to track changes in mobility, so that you can have at-home care. And I think that's a huge part of the healthy aging equation as well. What is affordable home care looking like? So it's not just the extremely wealthy individuals who can afford to fill their house with high-tech devices,
Yep.
but what is affordable at-home care that can really sense real-time changes in your gait. So the way you're walking, for instance, in your pulse, in your heart rate, in other parameters, and then not to send it to a doctor who has to then read it, because we know, again, that's expensive. That's a rate limiting step, but to have automatic signals so that only serious cases would then go to the doctor. But then you would be able to get real-time feedback on how you're progressing, to have more empowerment over your own healthcare journey as well. So there's a company called Humor that have done a lot of work in osteoporosis, and their CEO, Dan Fahat. I always tell Dan that the first time I saw him speak about the journey of the osteoporosis patient, and I even went to their headquarters many years ago and got to walk around with a mobile phone in my pocket that could detect tiny changes in my gait. And then thinking through what that could mean in the world of healthy aging is something that again, personally, outside of any of my affiliated organizations, I've always found very interesting and been passionate about.
Yeah, they've been on an interesting journey, and I got some FDA announcement recently. So that's I like seeing sort of all that come to fruition from these novel startups. And let's go a little beyond bio and biotech and tech bio now, and head over to the Science and Technology Facilities Council of the UK Research and Innovation Organization. And this is another, again, a couple of years ago, I had George McGinnis on, who runs the Healthy Aging Challenge. And when I saw your involvement there, I was like, she must be involved in some neurodegeneration research, something like that. No, your remit and portfolio responsibilities here are beyond this area. And if I can just list some of them: astronomy, solar and planetary sciences, particle physics, particle astrophysics, nuclear physics, accelerator sciences, and computational accelerator sciences. All really cool stuff that, I love reading about, understand a very small amount of it. Angela, talk a little bit about how you got involved with STFC, what it's like, being a molecular oncologist sitting in a meeting talking about particle astrophysics, and all sorts of other cool things that you get to do now with this particular role as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ira. Yeah, it's definitely a funny one. I do remember when they reached out and they said, would you like a seat on this council? And then, as you did, I researched what are the main areas. And then I went back to them and it was like, are you sure you mean me? Because I'm definitely not a particle physicist. And they took me through their reasoning and their thinking, and they wanted somebody who could help them think through how their investments in different technologies and facilities, and the ones you listed, were could enter the commercial arena. So what was possible in terms of translating that into things that could be commercialized through partnerships, through intellectual property, also looking at what does it mean for job generation within those spaces, within STEM, within the UK. And then they did also want to have somebody from the life sciences industry on that council. You're right, I'm the only one with a biology background there, to start to help them think through which elements are transferable to have impact also in the life sciences area. For instance, which parts could be used in radiotherapy, or which parts could be used. I think recently in the pandemic, there was the work on crystallography on different parts of the viral spike protein in the UK. So what is that crossover, that intersection between physics and medicine?
Yeah.
I would say that practically, after a year of being there, it's a mix of me having this giddy joy at seeing science I haven't been exposed to before. So I remember we got to see some of the first unprocessed images from the James Webb Telescope long before they were made publicly available. And of course, I'm looking at it and I've got no idea what I'm looking at, but they're talking me through it and I'm over the moon. And then I get to see this. And I got to go, not only did I get to go and spend time at the CERN Institute, where we're the second largest funders of the CERN Institute, but also got to go with the principal investigators of the CERN Institute, which I think is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and really ask them everything possible about their work. And I remember one of my council members is working on recreating collisions between particles that happened immediately after the Big Bang, and then using colorimetry to connect those patterns, and then, of course, needs to analyze that data. So this is where we could start to talk about, okay, what is actually needed in the informatics side, what is actually needed in the data analytics side, and there you see a lot of the crossover with the area that I've moved into over the last decade. Sure. I would say, though, that a lot of practically the value that I generate there is often in the operationalization and in the commercialization. So they asked me now to take up a role on the Business and Innovation Committee together with Hitesh Thakkar. And so Hitesh's background is very much in the VC world. And that's where his whole career has been spent. And Hitesh and I are working together now with the Business and Innovation Committee of the STFC to look at what sort of company partnerships, what sort of commercialization strategy makes the most sense for the organization. It is a new entity. So they used to have the commercialization group and the innovation group, and now we have the Business and Innovation group bringing it all together. And so it's been really exciting to work with Hitesh on what should that look like, what is our program of work going to be, and also looking at who do we want to have on board in that committee, because we're just going through a round of selections at the moment. But I think, Ira, before we started recording, you and I were talking about the joys you get from being able to talk to so many different scientists. And I think that's still very, very true for me. And to be able to do it in these environments where you can really, not just at a high level, understand what somebody's doing, but have that one-on-one time with a great mind to ask them over and over again, how exactly did you do that? What is that? How does this work? Is one of the great privileges that I get from the STFC.
That's awesome. Really awesome. Very exciting. Angeli, what else is anything else coming up for 2023 that we should know about in terms of conferences you're going to be presenting at, presentations, otherwise that you're going to be giving, places we could run into you, potentially meet you, listen to you, anything else that's on the schedule that you want to mention? Please take the floor.
It's very, very, very kind of you, Ira, but I have to admit that in 2023, I actually plan to just have my team taking center stage. So every time I've been sent an invitation to go and speak somewhere, I've been very quickly identifying somebody in Roche who could actually go in my place and be the better person to go and represent what we're doing. I would say that a lot of that is to do with the internal focus that I would like to give Roche at the moment. So I think there is a lot of opportunity in operational excellence. And so 2023 is somewhat my operational excellence year of looking a little bit internally. I will, though, be at Biotech X in Basel. So I haven't signed up to be a speaker, but a lot of people from the DIGI team are going to be speaking there. And so I'm going to be very lazy and just sitting around watching them speak. But I hope to, because I'm not speaking, I hope to have a lot more freedom in terms of meeting people. And since normally I'm there as a speaker, and then I give my talk, and then I immediately run back to the office to do my next meeting, I'm hoping to have a little bit more time this year to go around, to talk to people, to watch other people's talks, which is, of course, the more exciting thing. I know what I have to talk about. I want to see what everyone else has got to say.
Got it. Great story, amazing journey. And again, wishing you the best with all of this, not just the life sciences and and tech bio stuff, but obviously the stargazing, the particle physics, and everything in between. Just a really amazing journey, and I'm just so honored to be able to listen to your story and be able to share it with our audience. And I'm really wishing you the best with it. Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Dr. Angeli Möller, head of the Data and Integrations Generating Insights Group at Roche, doing really important things to bring together data, technology, ultimately enabling innovation for patients and major unmet medical needs. Angeli, again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us. Thank you, obviously, for everything you're doing there at the Roche organization. And as we like to say here on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people via what you do. Really a great story. And thanks for sharing it.
Oh, thank you for having me on, Ira. And for anyone who's listening and wants to reach out, please feel free to do so through LinkedIn. I really enjoyed being here today.
Great having you.